And greetings all to our podcast viewers and listeners of our real estate series. And I think this is part 3, Mike. So we're going to move on. I am Dave Springsteen. I'm a CPA and tax leader at Withum Smith & Brown and also international leader at HLB. We have a wonderful, wonderful real estate group, and we are a top-ranked tax advisory and advisory firm that also consults in test work. So full service, well recognized. And I'm very fortunate to be here with Mike Hurwitz, our real estate expert, who brings today a definition of a few terms and the insights in the real estate world of benefits. So Mike, why don't we get started here and explain to me these terms QOZ and QOF.
Qualified Opportunity Zone, and this was came out of the Tax Jobs and Cuts Act. As we discussed last week on deferred exchanges, our last podcast, the government took away deferred exchanges for lots of tangible personal property. Only real estate can be used for a deferred exchange. When they took that away from us, they gave us this concept of this tax deferral of a qualified opportunity zone. What it is it's generally a low-income census tract designated by the governors of the 50 states. There's roughly 9,000 of these designated nationwide. And what it does is it's a code section that allows a deferral. And what you do is you would invest gains into it and you get certain tax incentives that we can talk about and we'll touch upon in a little bit. But a qualified opportunity zone is really just an incentive that the government has out there for us to invest in low-income communities that are depressed around the country to spur economic growth in those areas, create jobs, with benefits. So that's what a qualified opportunity zone is.
And you're saying these are designated zones by states or in conjunction with the federal government?
Both. You know, there's actually a website. It's called the CDFI, Community Development Financial Institutions Fund, and you can go on there and you can type in an area. If it's got a little blue area, it's a zone. And if you invest in these zones, whether you have a business in the zone or property in the zone, you will get these certain benefits. You get the benefits, going back to your first question, a QOF. What a QOF is a qualified opportunity fund. And that is the investment vehicle. It's either a partnership or a corporation. And that is the vehicle that will buy in the zone. It will buy property in the zone. And a QOF is either a partnership or a corporation.
Okay, and this is where unrelated investors can gather and pool their monies, or is this always just a closely held fund?
There could be large funds, there could be small funds, it could be two people, just you and I. And again, this is an incentive. And what the government has done to encourage people to buy in these communities is to say, if you have a capital gain, you do not have to pay the tax on that capital gain as long as you invest in a QOF. As long as you take the gain, the proceeds, the money, and you exchange that for either partnership interest in a QOF or stock in a corporation, that is a deferral transaction. You have a personal gain selling stock, you sell stock, Microsoft stock or any publicly traded stock. And instead of paying tax on that gain today, you would defer that gain recognition and invest in a QOF.
So you had talked before in a prior podcast about 1031s, like-kind exchange of similar properties. Sounds like this is a broader opportunity.
It's a broader opportunity in that you do not need to necessarily buy like-kind property. In 1031s now, you can only buy and then buy, or only sell and then buy replacement property that is real property. Here, a QOF or a QOZ investment, you can sell anything. You can sell any kind of property that will produce a capital gain. Your entry ticket, if you will, into this kind of deferral mechanism is you can have any capital gain as long as it's a capital gain, long-term, short-term, and as long as you invest it in after December 31st, 2017, and invest it into a QOF, a partnership or corporation, within 180 days, which is very similar to the like-kind exchange rule. You have 180 days to reinvest that gain. You would defer that gain and get the benefits that we have yet to talk about. I will say the 180-day, which is very interesting. This is a little bit different than a 1031. When you have a 1031, a deferred exchange, the entity that sold the property has to be the same taxpayer to buy the new property, which is interesting here in the OZ world, is if a partnership has a gain and the partnership does not reinvest it, the gain gets passed throughout to you, the individual, and now the individual can elect to defer that gain and reinvest in a QOF.
So remind me, why would I want to go into a qualified fund and area versus a 1031? What are the real benefits? Tax deferral, tax savings completely?
Well, interesting. There used to be three benefits: a deferral, exclusion, and an exemption. Now there's only two left because of the time it phased out. But for one, you get a deferral. If you sell stock, if you sell a fleet of taxi cabs, first of all, stock in taxi cabs or boats, those are no longer allowed a 1031. Business properties no longer. It's got to be real estate for a 1031. So the qualified opportunity zone allows this deferral for other types of assets, investment and trade or business. So that's a pretty good benefit there. Now, you have that gain in the stock. The first benefit is you do not pay tax on that until December 31st, 2026. So you still have a 3-year deferral. So that's a deferral of the gain. The second big benefit that's no longer around, part of that gain you were allowed to exclude. When December 2026 came around, you'd only have to pay tax on 85% of that gain, but you would have already had to deploy and invest in a QF. That is off the table now. But the big home run here is that if you hold that investment, whether the QOF or, which we'll talk about in a little bit, maybe a QOZB, a lower tier entity, if they hold that asset for 10 years, Dave, and then you sell it, all of the appreciation on that asset you bought is excluded from gain, excluded from tax. So it's very powerful, but you have to be willing to A, wait the 10 years, and B, be willing to invest in one of these areas that is kind of blighted a little bit, right?
Right. Kind of interesting from a business aspect. Sometimes blighted zones take forever to recover. And 10 years, you say, is a long period, but it seems to be too short. But
well, we could talk about an example. You and I were together in Asbury Park, and I had a fabulous time down there. We were at a partner retreat, if anyone really cares, but we were down in Asbury Park, and that happens to be an opportunity zone. And you could, if you had gained, say, in stocks or bonds or other areas, you could buy some real estate down there. And you and I saw, Dave, some nice buildings being put up there. You put them up, you rent them, and 10 years down the line, you sell it, you're paying no tax. Now, granted, whatever we sell today that has the capital gain, you are paying tax in 2026. It's the appreciation on the asset you buy.
Okay. Yeah, when you were talking about 1031s, deferred exchanges, there's this concept called boot. And the general rule was, as I recall, don't touch the boot. What happens to boot in this type of transaction?
I mean, that's another, wow, yes, very good. That's another area that is a little bit different between the 1031 real estate deferral that we all know about and now this OZ. What's interesting here is if you sell stock or you sell property, whatever it is, you only have to redeploy the gain. So theoretically, you sell stock. Let's just say your cost basis is, $500,000, $500,000, and you sell it for $1.5 million. You only have to, if you want to defer the full $1 million, you can redeploy the $1 million in exchange for a QOF interest, and you could take back your principal, the $500,000.
Okay.
And there's no tax on that. Now, if you take back more, you might have partial tax, and then you can defer whatever you put in. But you only have to invest the gain proceeds, which is a little bit different than a 1031.
This is very interesting. What else should we know about these zones and funds? And
Well, there's two other kind of things. You again, the individual defers its gain, and then they invest in the QOF. The QOF has to meet an investment standard. You file a Form 8996. 90% of their assets have to be in OZ assets. Usually you push it down to a second partnership or corporation where they buy the property. There's more flexibility down there, better rules that allow for what we call this working capital safe harbor. And it's another test on substantially all, where some of the assets can be outside of a zone. It gets a little bit complicated with some of these rules. But my point here is what you have to be aware of. If you did our project in Asbury Park, for instance, where you put the gain money into QOF, drop it down, and now you buy property in Asbury Park, or I always say Buffalo, New York, or south side of Chicago, some blighted areas that could use some love and money, new jobs, job creation, things like that. There, you have to substantially improve the property, right? Not only do you have to hold it for 10 years, but you have to substantially improve it. Well, what does that mean, Dave? Well, that means if you bought the property for $1 million, you can add a number of zeros on it or whatever it is, you have to double the basis. They carve out land. So if you buy, say, a property for $1 million, just round numbers, and you allocate $200,000 to land, you bought a building, a dilapidated apartment building, whatever it might be, for $800,000. The rules then say you must substantially improve it, which means over a 30-month period, you have to reinvest another $800,000, the portion related to the building, double the basis. So, that's something you have to do, which is not bad. You want to improve that property, put money in that property. So that would be an investment in, a building. The other issue is if you were to buy a business, right? A business, which we don't really talk about. I'm a real estate guy, but theoretically, the QOF can drop the money down and they can buy a business. My example I usually do use is like a hair salon, right? And that's really a business in the zone, generating income, creating jobs. That's what the intent of this provision is to do, create jobs and stuff like that. There's some rules about generating income in the zone. More than 50% of the income has to be from the zone to prevent some of the internet companies out there. But then there's some ways to get around or other safe harbors to meet the income test. Salary, 50% of the salary, 50% of the hours. But you can have a business in the zone or the substantially improved. So those are some other requirements you have to meet there.
Very interesting. Great insight, Mike. Always informative. Your expertise goes a long way. Look forward to our future podcasts, and maybe we'll talk about cost seg studies, and more importantly, how cost segs impact. You talked about REITs a few podcasts ago. You talked about 1031s, and now we're talking about QOZs. How does cost seg play into these deferrals and exclusions? So, but any closing comments?
Well, I'm a big fan of QOZs, but the problem is, because I'm in real estate, I do prefer a 1031. If you sell real estate, buy a 1031 or do a 1031 to buy a replacement property. That said, if you have any other capital gain, I think, considering an investment in a zone is worth looking into. And, I'll plug my city, Buffalo, New York, where I grew up. You can buy land along the water there and put up solar wind panels. You can put up the wind farms, and that's substantially improving the land. And in 10 years from now, I like that. I think some of the inner cities that we're seeing, Dave, you could do vertical growth. We've all heard about that. So I like the idea of OZs. They kind of got impacted a little bit with the pandemic. Kind of hit at the wrong time. But I think they're going to be around. I think some of the provisions may be extended through 2028. You didn't hear it from me, but that's my gut feeling. We'll see what happens.
All right. Thanks for that thought. So thank you all. Take a look at our webpage on all the real estate consulting that we can provide you. There seems to be a big iceberg here. We're only seeing the tip of it right now with Mike, but stay tuned to future podcasts. Thanks all.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks again.